order of the Public Market Advisory Commission. It is Thursday, December 21st, 2017. We are in the City Council chambers of the second floor of City Hall. Should we do a roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Wolf.
Here.
Commissioner Getz.
Here.
Commissioner Panazzo.
Here.
And Commissioners Cassiari and Parker are not present.
Approval of this agenda here, if anybody has any additions.
I do have one change. It should not say work session. This is a regular meeting. So at the top,
Okay.
that's a mistake. It should say meeting agenda.
Got it. First, public commentary, limited to agenda items only, if there's any public that want to comment. And then in the packet here, we have the previous meeting's minutes.
I move to accept.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. Presentations.
Great. So we have a not a presentation exactly today. This is more our community services administrator, Derek Delacour, has generously offered to come and answer questions about the market infrastructure improvement project. You know, it's just some more details about what you'd like to know, anything about the project. And so he's not going to present, but he will be able to hopefully, answer things for you. Before he begins, I just want to do a quick recap of the project. So yeah, basically the market infrastructure project was approved by City Council. The site plan was approved in August 2016. And then the contract was put out for bid. The bids were exceeded the cost estimate. So our original budget was $875,000, actually. And the lowest bid then was $1,200,000. And we are now joined by Commissioner Cassiari. Hi. So since it was over budget, we went back, staff went back, identified more funds, and worked to lower the cost of that by working with the contractor and coming up with a new number. So the new cost was, the new budget after that first time was $1,375,000. So we rebid again in April this past year, incorporating the changes, but the low bid came in at $1,250,000, and then factoring in design contingency and construction oversight, the project budget necessary to complete it would have been $1,500,000, or approximately $625,000 higher than the original project budget. So given this, the project, even after we identified more funding from the DDA, $200,000 for the parking lot, for example, it was still underfunded by $137,000, excuse me. And so when faced with the shortfall and considering that we need a lot of other infrastructure improvements as well, as identified earlier in that list presented a few meetings ago, staff considered it prudent to not move ahead with construction at this time. So staff went back and are evaluating the work that can be performed on the current infrastructure. That's what we're doing currently. And other projects that can be done right now, such as replacing the parking lot, which is set for April. And the current project site plan is approved for 3-year period. So staff is also working to identify other possibilities, which is, I think, what some of the questions may be about. So that's a quick recap. And I think, Derek, I don't know if you want to say anything, but we'll open it up to questions.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for having me. It's nice to finally be here. I think Stephanie did an excellent job of recapping where we're at as staff, the history of the project, how it started, where we ended up, and I'm sure the committee is very familiar with the conversation and the discussion that went on around the project, and ultimately the decision that was made. I'd be glad to, I don't want to go back through everything Stephanie went back through, so I'll spare you that, but I can tell you anything you want to ask, we'd be glad to answer in the best possible way, and if we can't get you an answer tonight, we'll be glad to look into it and provide additional information in the future.
So I've got a question. So, you know, with just trying to figure out what the plan is forward of what is the likelihood of actually finding more funding? Is that something that's on the plan, or is that?
I think I get the question. In some ways, it's not necessarily as much as it is more funding. Obviously, the project is twice the original budget, which was a concern for us, especially after it was value engineered. We started with a budget and a project that seemed reasonable. Had significant concerns with the original bid that came back. Value engineered the project, which is one of my least favorite things to do, because then you start to move backwards on the quality of the project. And we weren't real comfortable with that, but we decided we wanted to do that rebid and see if the original bid was a quirk, and hoped it had come in significantly less, not by just barely enough to qualify. So it wasn't a matter of just finding more money at the end. The shortfall was relatively small compared to the size of the project. But the bigger concern was really twofold. One was the total amount being spent for a project that was originally budgeted at $850,000 or $875,000, and moving forward at twice that cost. And the second concern that both the Parks and Recs manager and I, specifically I, shared, as we moved through this project, we had started a process of looking at the additional capital investment across the entire park system. We have 5 or 6 major facilities that were all built and constructed around the same time. We have 159 parks, I'm sure everybody's aware, 2,000 acres. And we started to take a look at what the capital costs were going to be and the impact to both the general fund and the parks millage to maintain those facilities over the next several years, and started to realize we had a significant shortfall in established capital to do those things. That led to a secondary concern of draining the entire market fund reserve balance. Because if there's less available funding and other sources, then any market improvements would have to compete with all of those other projects for those additional resources. And that raised another red flag to us. We were not happy to drain it down to just $100,000 prior to knowing what our additional capital costs and needs are going to be over the next 10 or 15 years, let alone, it turns out, draining the entire thing and then realizing there was going to be a significant amount of additional competition for capital if the market needed anything. The market is one of the only facilities that enjoys a reserve fund right now compared to any other facility in the park system. So even though the shortfall after the second bid was relatively small in comparison to the overall cost of the project, even after the first bid, those things started to pile up for us. And one of the biggest reasons we've taken this pause is we are actually in the process now of doing a capital assessment of all of the park's facilities. Once we know what that is and that we have the ability to secure the capital to maintain those, we are glad to revisit this project. Even at the end of the day, if it costs a little bit more than the second bid, it's more about being comfortable that the reserves are there to do what we need than it is the total cost. And I know that sounds a little odd to say, but that's where it is. And that's going to be more probably the determiner of when and how it comes back online than just securing in another $139,000. Now, that being said, excuse me for piling everything into one answer here, we are looking for alternative sources of capital to do the project now, regardless of that, if they were to come to fruition. We haven't identified any. We have 3 years under the existing site plan and a couple of more years, if that's extended administratively, to keep the project alive. So everybody loves the project. We want to see it happen. It was very disheartening across the board to see it, to make this decision, but we felt it was the prudent one at the time. So that's where we're at currently.
I'm curious why this financial assessment that you did didn't happen at the time that Sarah initially proposed the project. And I'm actually surprised that Parks and Recreation approved expenditure of architect plans and approved the Vendor Operation Advisory Committee, which I sat on last year for 4 to 5 2+ hour sessions. It seemed like all signs were go at that time, and so I'm wondering why it took so long to realize that these funds were actually not available or not.
Well, if it had come in on budget, it came in $625,000 over budget. So those funds were expended with the anticipation that it would come in under budget. There wouldn't be the pause if it had come in at $875,000. The pause happened after the bids came in, and the bids came in at twice the budget. So the funds were expended under the anticipation that those estimates were correct. They were wildly inaccurate. So I think that's the bigger concern. The funds weren't expended with the idea that the project would cost $1.5 million. The change came when it was determined that even though those funds were expended, you had a project that was $625,000 over budget.
And I'm wondering if at the time of hiring the architect, if there's any discussion of getting more than one, cost estimate from, maybe a different architect, or you just worked with the one firm.
I don't know. I wasn't with the city at the time.
Okay.
I came in after that. I came in about the time it was being run for site plan. I can tell you, we verified that estimate with our building officials and some other local professionals because we were questioned rather rigorously about whether that was going to be enough. It was conservative. Nobody anticipated. Nobody thought that we were going to see the bids come in excess as what they were. And it seemed to follow a trend line across the city. Whether it was road construction projects or anything, the cost for construction coming out of the recession and as the building ramped up far exceeded anybody's anticipation. And this project got caught on the cusp of that. We had projects across the city that were having to go back out to bid for being 20, 30, 40% under what the original estimate was. So it wasn't just this project. Normally, we would have been very upset with the architect who provided an estimate that was this far off. But what we're seeing is this was not a unique situation. Lots of professionals missed the change in the market at approximately the same time.
Are you able to quantify the amount of staff hours and maybe even close to a dollar amount? I'm just thinking of when you look at a budget shortfall of $137,000 as of knowing what happened with the vendor committee and sitting on the community committee myself, and the amount of staff hours that went into making those committees happen. And I'm just thinking, if the project doesn't happen, how much staff hours did we lose on the project then?
Well, and I mean, I want to be very clear. Those hours aren't lost.
Yeah.
Those hours led to an approved site plan, which is probably the most difficult part of the process and the most labor-intensive part of the process. And there's a 5-year window for that approval. So there was an achievement made by those expenditures. Now, did it result in the construction of the project? No. To answer your original question, I don't know if all of the staff hours were tracked specifically by project. Within individual departments, if we're tracking and doing work for outside private entities, we track our hours. But general work for city projects isn't usually broken out by projects. That's what we do with the hours we have here. So
Sure.
I could look into it a little bit more to see if we could break that number out, but
I guess the losing those staff hours from me, this is probably the first time that I personally am hearing it, maybe in the commission, that there's actually positive and that the staff actually want this project to still happen. That's not something that we've actually heard.
Oh
here.
my God, this is
Okay.
one of the, well, I'll be very honest
I
with
don't
you.
know if
This
it's-
was a terribly difficult decision for me because it was coming in here new. It was one of the projects I was most excited about.
Okay.
Staff had exerted an enormous amount of effort. Our previous farmer's market manager went to the map for this project, stood in front of council for 3 hours and was grilled by council for this project. Everybody worked extremely hard to pave the way to get that approval. That first bid, to say it was disheartening would be an understatement. It is what it is. We made what we thought was the financially prudent decision, especially as additional factors became known as far as available capital for other facilities. And really, we talked long and hard about completely depleting the farmer's market reserve. in a time when we didn't know if we would have additional capital, if we had electronic issues or electrical issues or paving issues, or if there was issues with the shed. We couldn't guarantee there would be money available to resolve those if the reserve was completely gone. The market would be in a position to compete with other parks projects throughout the system to get that money, and we weren't sure that was really the prudent decision to make at the time.
I have a little bit of concern about the communication between Parks and Recreation and this commission, namely because the last update I remember having is probably in May or June, when we heard that the project was going to go on hold and that Parks and Rec was going to work on alternative funding to try to meet whatever that bid was that came in, the second bid. I believe that was in May or June, shortly after Sarah left. I started asking for an update in August. Month after month, we didn't receive any updates about what was going on with fundraising and if the status had changed. The most recent public statement that Parks and Recreation made didn't even come to this commission first. I heard about it through an MLive reporter who came to our market stall and started asking us questions about how we felt about the end of the project. And so I'm personally upset that Parks and Recreation didn't talk to this commission first. I feel disrespected by that. And I guess I want to ask you, what's the role of the commission in this project? How can we advise, how can we steer, and how can we support the project going forward?
Well, first of all, I wasn't aware of the lack of communication and the frustration. This is the first I've heard of it, and we will certainly endeavor to make improvements. And that's definitely an issue. The role of the commission is we're interested in any ideas or thoughts you may have on the project. Right now, the last update is still exactly where the project stands. There's really been no change since then. So I don't have anything here to give you in addition to that. I can make sure that Stephanie understands if there's any changes that they were brought to you immediately, and if there's any questions either Colin or I can ask, then we'll be here. As far as the role that you guys can play, it's really a matter of, at this point, allowing us to regroup and do that capital assessment and make sure of where the system as a whole stands. The farmers market is part of the park system, and we need to have a better understanding of where we are capital-wise with our facilities across the board before we really move forward with any major capital improvements, unless it's a necessary fix or a part that's failing. And we've kind of entered into that maintenance mode right now. I know Stephanie's working with the commission on improvements that can be made in the interim and that would not interfere with the future construction of the project, which we think is prudent and appropriate at this time. But we're open to any suggestion the commission may have about where we should go as staff with the project.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to Derek's. So I take, that's my responsibility to communicate to you when we have changes and updates and everything. And so, yeah, we can definitely try to do a better job of keeping you informed of what's going on with the project. As Derek deals with all of parks in the city, but my job is just the market, and so moving forward, we can make more of an effort to have, or I can make more of an effort to have even maybe some smaller communications or just keeping this on our radar and letting you know what's going on. We hadn't had much to report, as Derek said, since we hadn't made any new decisions since April, but I think going more into depth like this and any smaller things like the money being returned, for example, yeah, we will do more to try to keep you informed with that.
I guess what I would like to communicate to the Parks and Rec and the city as a whole, as I see this project or some other improvement projects so that we can keep our greens from freezing when we bring them to sell in the wintertime as a top priority for the future of the farmers market. Years ago, the market was built as an open-air facility. They used to bring smudge pots down and build big fires around it, and they could keep, I'm sure those fires could give off lots of heat, and they could sell their apples and potatoes, and they didn't have greens. but they did have storage crops to sell, and they could keep those things warm. We can't operate like that anymore. Times have changed, farming has changed, what's available to sell at a farmer's market has changed, and we've become a population that's used to working mainly indoors. How many people go out and do chores for 3-4 hours a day like people used to do? So we're not even used to being out in the cold that much, but I see the future of the market and the younger farmers that are coming to the market and investing in their own infrastructure for hoop houses and different things like that, so that they can have a product to sell year-round to make their business sustainable. This or some kind of a enclosed, heated, a way for us to keep our product from freezing in the wintertime is absolutely necessary for the future of the market.
Understood and agreed.
And, you know, if it can't happen this year, fine. If it can't happen next year, fine. But I think that the vendors at the market need to see that this is going to be coming. Because otherwise, personally, when it's going to be 10 degrees or colder, we just go. Too cold, we might deliver if a couple people want to order something, a couple of our wholesale customers. Otherwise, we'll wait another week before we can come. If we know that it's going to be able to be at least 32 degrees when we get there, then we can harvest. Usually when it's cold, it's sunny, so it's nice and warm in the hoop house, so we can harvest. But it doesn't do us any good to harvest if it's just going to go to spoil when we get it there. So I
Understood.
think that's just that's the viewpoint that I see. The market is more than apples now, and apples shouldn't be that cold either.
Understood.
And I'd like to add, it's not only vendors that want it, but I don't know if Stephanie shared the customer survey with Parks and Recreation that she did recently.
Yeah,
But
we're
on-
well, yeah, we're
On
well
a
aware.
list of, you know, suggested new things for the market, by far and wide, the most picked thing was a winter structure over music, if I recall, right? Over music, over kids' activities, all these things. I mean, a lot of customers want it as well.
Yeah,
So
my
it's-
wife and I have been customers for years, and since we've moved here in the last year and a half, spend every Saturday down there. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how much we do understand that and was the reason for the second bid to begin with. Normally, when a project comes that much over bid, and we wouldn't go back to the DDA and start asking for more money. We wouldn't do the things. We wouldn't have considered depleting the entire market fund reserve. That effort was because we do understand and do believe. I know that maybe is unsatisfactory today and maybe even rings a little hollow based on your earlier comments. I mean, I thought, I wish we would have been here explaining that sooner, and I understand that.
It's just, yeah, the absence in communication has allowed our imaginations to go to like, why aren't they telling us what's going on? I mean,
Understood.
it makes us think.
We have to
the
do a better
negative.
job of communicating with Stephanie. If she didn't have the information she needed to relay to you guys, then that's my responsibility, and we'll make sure it doesn't happen again. That's easy to resolve.
And I think I had in my mind, because Sarah made it known to us that the DDA, if there's no action on grant funds, they'll pull out. And she made it known that even though there's a, 3-year approval of the site plan, the funds aren't necessarily going to be there for that long. And so I feel like that was sort of her parting message. One of her parting messages with us was, if this doesn't happen soon, it probably won't. So
I would disagree with that. I spoke with Miss Polly today. It was our decision to give the money back. We don't sit on other people's money. They didn't ask for it back.
Okay.
They're willing to jump back into this project. Now, just like with the bids, unexpected changes can happen, and certainly to the DDA as well. But in talking to Ms. Polly as recently today, they're looking for ways, and we spent a great deal of time talking about how to get this project back on track, either in its current form or a different form, and how we go about doing this. So this is not something that's shelved and forgotten. It doesn't mean it's going to happen soon. We need to get through this capital assessment, which we have most of it prepped. We need to get through the millage in 18 and know what type of resources we're going to have. That vote comes up in November. We need to know those resources are going to be there before we can make. I have no concern that this community is going to support the Parks millage. But to take on $1.5 million project this close to this with the known capital problems we have, I don't want to make any assumptions either today. So I think once we have that done and the millage is determined what that process is going to look like and we're through that, I think it's going to be very easy to bring this project back online once we know we have the capital to do what we need to do with all of the facilities throughout the system. So to think this is a forgotten project would be, from staff's point of view, or that we're glad to put this up and have to hold on it. I can tell you from my point of view and from Colin's point of view, it was one of the more difficult decisions. It was the very first difficult decision I had to make since I was here. Ultimately, it was my decision, and I'm the one who made the determination to pause until we went through this other process. But we really had high hopes at that second bid that first one was an anomaly, and that the second one would come back and make this reasonable. I can't say how disappointing it was that it didn't.
So I have a question, again, coming back to actually sources of funding in this way too, that is there a mechanism within the parks for, and so one thing that's different about the market, or I'm sure you have this with other facilities too, where there is a group of, I represent the shoppers representative, that there are lots of people who feel very strongly about this who would be willing to kick in funds. I know it's a fundraising mechanism for this. If they knew it was dedicated toward this particular structure, and I don't see we've even made that ask. And it seems like that potentially, particularly if it's extended over a period, could be a fairly large source of funds. Is there a mechanism within parks that would help us, or is there some other entity that would? It's a question of how to structure that. Is that possible? Is that something you've done? Is that something you can give us guidance on?
Not something I've done. I'm certain it's possible. Anything's possible in some way, shape, or form. I have no doubt. And I would certainly say it's one of the things high on our list that when we start to evaluate this again is going to be investigated. Like I said, it's not just on pause to do that. We need to get through those other two exercises first. And then that will be. And if there are groups that want to be, I am sure there is some way to combine private and public resources for this. The market pushes 500,000 people through a year. To think we're not reaching out to our business partners now to talk about what public-private partnerships look like for this facility. We don't discuss those openly or publicly about who we're talking to at this time. But to say we're not reaching out and looking for private partners who may be interested in working with us on a capital project, it's safe to say. Whether we've gotten to the level of talking about crowdfunding or other things as a third piece or a third leg of the stool to that, we're certainly considering it. We hope not to have to do it, but if there's certainly people out there who want to invest in this, we can establish a way for them to contribute now, and that if the project doesn't happen, the money could be returned to them at a certain date. So those are all things that are infinitely possible.
Well, because I asked because it seems like, and the market already does have the structure of their own little kind of kitty for the separate funding, which is different than other things in the park structure, and that seems like a natural place to hold it. It seems like the market has been going through efforts for building a winter structure for not just the last 3 years, through the last few decades, it seems. And so if it's not used in this iteration, as long as I think people would be willing to donate it, if it was something that would go there eventually and it's kind of earmarked for that use, just as a building kind of capital fund for that one use.
If you think that's something people would be interested in now with really no end, usually we wait until we know we have an end game in sight before we start to fire people up for that kind of campaign or a capital campaign. If you think that's something that I'd be glad to look into it now and see what the mechanism for that is.
I'd be really interested in that, because I think that there is, I've talked to a lot of folks that seem like, yes, and there's the natural follow-up is like, well, you're willing to put your money where your mouth is. And is it something that will necessarily, here's the end point? Well, part of the reason is the chicken and the egg in terms of you don't have the funding, so you don't do the design, then you don't know how much it's going to cost, so you don't do the ask. But once you know the ask, then it's too late to have asked. So then you just don't do it because you don't have the money.
I'm glad we have the site plan approved on that process. I'm glad it's out of the public, because that knocks a couple of those points off.
Yeah.
I can suggest, and I've done this in other ways, it is much easier for a nonprofit to fundraise than it is a city and to be available. I don't want to put the burden on those folks, and I'd be glad to meet them, but if there is someone who wants to take up that cause as a nonprofit and start to fundraise, it's much easier from a tax standpoint, an interest standpoint, everything else, than the city becoming the entity that holds the funds on a charitable basis or a contribution basis. I'm not saying it can't be done, but if there is talk of establishing a nonprofit where they hold the money with an understanding that when the project's ready, that they'd be willing to come in and sit down and talk to the city about using that money towards the project, if there's someone who's capable of putting that together, it's a simpler way of doing that.
So, for example, the Ann Arbor Community Foundation, which is just down the street from the farmers market, has a zillion people associated with it. Would be a really natural thing, and they actually set up not-for-profits for just things exactly like this.
The community foundations exist almost inherently because of the difficulty the city has playing that role, for exactly that reason. And if they wanted to set up a specific, we'd be glad to promote it, put resources towards it, put staff towards it. We can bring attorneys to bear on how to set it up, all those things. That would be we'd be very glad to start that process now if you guys felt that was appropriate.
The financial assessment that you spoke of, what's the timeline for that, or when do you think that will be done and then decision-making can happen?
The assessment itself, the assessment of the resources is just about done now. We started with our largest 4 or 5 resources, and then we made projections on when the compressor at the hockey arenas are going to fail and how much that's going to cost us. And you know, Ann Arbor is similar to other cities, and I'll make the analogy to the roads, that a lot of this stuff was all built at the exact same time. So it's all going to fail at the exact same time. Now we start the process with finance of figuring out the depreciation curve, what can handle maintenance for another 5 years, and what is better to replace now. So I can tell you it will be done in time for us to make our argument or educate folks in the community about the millage. So I would say in the next 90 days, we'll have an idea of what that final piece of information looks like. Hopefully. I hope. Some of that's out of my hands. We're in the middle of budget season, and getting financial people to participate is difficult at times, and we need them for this.
All right, any more questions?
Anything other than the farmer's market? I'm not as good at Colin as the park stuff, but I'll take a shot if you guys got anything else.
All right, well, thank you very much, Derek.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I apologize for the frustration. I really do. I didn't realize it was here. We don't like that to happen. We take great pride in how we work with our boards and commissions across not only community services, but the city. I was just on my soapbox about that today. I can assure you that won't happen again. If it's a lack of communication that caused part of this frustration, that's my fault, and that's not going to happen again. That we can fix easily. We may not all agree on the decisions regarding the facility, the construction, all that, but this is easily resolved, and we'll do our best to make sure this doesn't happen again. So, yeah, have a great holiday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So regular business, we have no agenda items, or we do have any?
No agenda items.
No agenda items. Any new business, non-agenda items from anyone?
Yes, I believe we have one.
I just wanted to congratulate the Kapnick Orchards, who's our regular vendors at the farmers market, for winning the Michigan Cider Contest this 2017. I have an article that's the front page of the Adrian Daily Telegram today, but I think that that's something that the market should also be proud of, because they are a very dependable, regular vendor at the market, and so this first place cider will be available at the farmers market through the winter.
Very exciting. And then you're doing the annual report?
I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but
Okay.
I just wanted to share this with you. This is a report on everything, sort of all the things we did in 2017, statistics, numbers. We're hoping to use this as a tool for promoting and talking about the market, for sharing with people what we do, how big of an impact we have. There's things in here about our economic impact and our customer impact and our vendor, number of vendors involved. So it's just a good tool for being able to help, show that the market is a big piece of our community. So I just wanted to give you all a copy. I finished it today, so you were the first to see it. But
Yeah.
we'll put it on our website and everything.
Nice.
And then finally, the market manager report. Not a whole lot here. Applications for 2018 were sent out and are due March 1st. Last Wednesday market was this week until May. Becky and Renee, the part-time staff, will remain on during the winter to help with planning and outreach. Looking ahead, there will be, more details as we get closer to these things, but for 2018, we are doing the food truck rallies again and working with Zero Waste Washtenaw to cut down on our waste. Cooking demos once a month in partnership with Taste Local Difference and Edible Wow, and pulling in a lot of different chefs. Joel?
I'll be there.
From the community. I might be giving you a call. We are working on a plan to do a market to chef program to make it easier for chefs to buy from our vendors and to pick up at market, larger orders as well. And I'll share more about what that looks like in spring. And we'll be doing kids programming and activity again. So just looking at ways to pull in more customers, especially I think we're focusing on Wednesdays since Saturdays are very busy, but Wednesdays I think have dropped off in the past maybe 5 years or so. So we're looking at ways to like boost that market again. And finally, a quick update on the 5th and Detroit Street construction project. We just had a meeting about how to make people aware that that will be happening and communicate to the public, especially in terms of parking. Since for a large part of 2018, 5th Street will be under construction. So ways we will be doing that, really directing people to the Ann and Ashley structure, starting soon to do that. Putting like chalk marks on the sidewalk leading from Carytown to Ann and Ashley so people see it and get the sense like, okay, these are related, these are connected. Putting out posters, regular updates on all our social media and websites between the city and the DDA, Farmers Market. A banner that says coming soon for the improvements on 5th and Detroit. As cars drive by, they'll see it, and hopefully that'll give them, start them thinking about that. And then we'll be doing a lot with just signage around the market, sandwich board signs as people walk through to let them know. Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
The last update that I heard on the project is that they didn't know which way they were going to go on closures, if they were going to go for like a shorter full closure or like a one-lane closure that's longer. Have you heard anything more?
I've not heard anything on that.
I'm just curious.
I was wondering what happened to the 4th Street project, like the loading zone work? Did that get delayed from weather or?
Weather, yeah.
Okay.
It got delayed for weather. We were also going to do that little sidewalk between the market and Carytown.
Yeah.
It just rained all week when they planned to do it, so I think they want to do it in April before they really start doing the 5th in Detroit. I believe that's still the plan. Yeah. Okay. And we're going to be working hard to work with our vendors to make sure they can load and unload and the logistics of that as we get more details about their timeline and what pieces of 5th and Detroit they'll be working on when. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. So we are to our second public comment, which is not limited to agenda items, if anybody wants to speak. And we are adjourned.
Great, thank you.
Short and sweet.